Elon Musk spoke to Tucker Carlson about the dangers of artificial intelligence for humanity, among other topics. And his facial expressions can help you learn how to read the body language of people with Asperger's.
It's called the singularity. It's a singularity like a black hole. It's hard to predict. So I think we should be cautious with AI.
In this video, you will learn one simple trick to read any face, regardless if they have Asperger's or not, why it's so important to pay attention to people's blinking rate, and in the case of people with Asperger's, how to make it easier for them to read your emotions. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and you might remember my analysis of Elon's interview by the BBC, where he eviscerated James Clayton. Well, Elon said that his intentions with this kind of interviews was to talk with journalists from all over the political spectrum. This is important to determine a person's state of mind when we are going to do a body language analysis, so in this case we know that he's more than willing to do that interview. So let's take a second look at those two expressions we saw at the start of this video. They're going to be relevant to establish our approach to this analysis.
It's called the singularity. It's a singularity like a black hole. It's hard to predict. So I think we should be cautious with AI.
In this case, we have two signals. The first one is lip pressure, and the second is an eyebrow raise. Those are emotional markers just because they don't happen all the time during this interview, but at very precise moments. The trick is finding out what triggers them. But let's see another example in the following clip.
Once in a blue moon, rarely I will disagree with regulators, but the vast majority of the time, my companies agree with the regulations and comply. My companies agree with the regulations and comply.
We just spotted basically the same lip pressure than when he was talking about the unpredictability of AI. But in this case, he was talking about government regulations, a topic that is never comfortable for anyone. So maybe he is upset that he needs to make sure his companies comply to regulations that might change or might be unfair from his perspective. And that's why he displays that emotional marker. We are also noticing a pattern that could be part of his natural body language. Maybe his face in general is not that expressive, but we have our first clue into his emotion. Remember, body language is unique to every person, so we are trying to establish a pattern so we can understand the person's feelings. And that's why we have to address one myth about Asperger's. One general misconception about people with Asperger's is that they lack feelings or empathy, and this is simply not true. What happens is that they have difficulty identifying those emotions in themselves and discussing them. In fact, strong feelings such as fear, joy, or anger can be experienced much more intensely by people with Asperger's than the average person. Regarding the connection with other people's feelings or empathy, most individuals with Asperger's are able to get emotionally in sync with a person who is feeling a strong emotion. The problem is that they do not express emotions the way that we expect. It is not uncommon that their facial expression can be confusing, and one of the reasons that Elon jokes about being an alien is that his gaze is a very interesting contradiction. It's like he's detached and intensely focused on something at the same time. And one of the reasons he looks detached is because his glabella, or the space between his eyebrows, it almost never has any kind of expression. This area is critical for conveying emotions, but in his case, it doesn't tell much while he's talking. But on the other hand, he looks completely focused and invested in the person he's talking to. And it's because of his blinking rate. We typically blink every 5 or 6 seconds, maybe a bit more. But watching this video, I realized that this is one of the reasons Elon Musk's stare can be so intriguing, because he blinks around 6 or 7 times a minute. In fact, that intense eye contact could be uncomfortable for most people. That's why in persuasion, there's the rule of the 5 seconds. Keep eye contact, but every 5 seconds, give it a rest. Blinks help the brain register and process information. In Elon's case, I noticed that his blinking usually happens right after he looks to one side, trying to structure his idea as he speaks. And when he finally gets it, he blinks. That's how you identify body language patterns in any person. But I think the next clip is the best one to depict Elon's odd emotional displays.
It is conceivable that AI could take control and reach a point where you couldn't turn it off and it would be making the decisions for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely the way things are headed, for sure.
So Tucker is basically asking the direct question about AI, that at some point it could make all decisions for humans. It sounds a bit crazy, like becoming our master, and you could imagine that any other human being is going to react with some kind of emotion about this. But how depressing and bleak the future sounds when painted this way. But we cannot see any emotions on his glabella or his forehead. The only thing we spot once again is that lip pressure at the end of his words. That's how we start spotting patterns so we can better understand the facial expressions of people with Asperger's. And it's great because the same tools will give you an advantage reading any face. Now, talking about general body language and hand gesture, Elon is very economical. He usually uses his right hand or dominant hand to add emphasis to his words, but he usually looks like he doesn't want to overdo it, so he prefers to anchor both hands on his legs or one of his knees. That last posture, the anchoring of both hands on one knee, makes him look just a little defensive by raising his left shoulder. But I don't think he cares much about that because he's the type that prefers his words to convey his ideas more than his body language. And so far, his ideas and companies have spoken for himself, so there's that. It's interesting that at some point of the interview, he makes a pause to think with his hands.
But I think perhaps what you may be alluding to here is that regulations are really only put into effect after something terrible has happened.
It's his way of taking just a second off while he finds the most efficient way to convey what he's going to say next. So far, we have noticed that Elon's body language, including his facial expressions, can leave a lot to interpretation if we are not aware of him having Asperger's. But we usually don't have that benefit with most people, so that's why we should be ready to look at all those tiny body language details whenever we are engaging on a conversation. But another characteristic that could put you off in cases like this is his monotone voice. It has very subtle inflections, but while those inflections could be emotional displays for him, they are practically the standard voice tone fluctuations for the average person. And I always stress the importance of listening to people's voice, not only because of the words they choose to express themselves, but volume, voice tone, and if there are any changes here and there. In Elon, it is especially difficult for that monotone. I say Elon because not every person with Asperger's does this, and it also depends on the circumstances, as I mentioned at the start of this video. Now, I promise to give you a trick to help people with Asperger's to better understand our emotions, and it's very simple. You just have to be more verbose than usual with your emotions. Since they have a hard time reading faces, spotting body language clues, listening to voice tone, and making sense of it, it is much easier if you take your time to establish your current mood or feeling with words. That's when you notice that we usually have a very limited emotional vocabulary, and there's something beautiful about expanding your knowledge of words about feelings. You become more nuanced, not only to better communicate with someone who might have trouble understanding your facial expressions, but you also learn to better define how you feel at any given moment. It is not exactly the same to feel angry than to feel annoyed. It is much more precise to know that you feel isolated than just sad, or that you know that you feel happy because you're especially inspired right now. Expanding your emotional vocabulary will have a positive effect on you and those around you. And body language in people with Asperger's can be fascinating, and if you want me to go deeper in this topic, here's my promise. If this video gets to 10,000 likes, then I'll make a video dedicated exclusively to Asperger's and nonverbal communication. So let's make a recap of today's tips. People with Asperger's could be hard to read, but they will have a body language baseline just like any other person, only that it will be way more subtle. To define that body language baseline, don't stress too much if their eyebrows don't move too much or their voice tone doesn't change. Spot the subtle reactions such as Elon when he pressed his lips so you can build a reference about their emotions. And at the same time, make sure you expand your emotional vocabulary and never make the mistake of thinking that your body language is no longer necessary. On the contrary, keeping your own body language while you use nuanced words to describe how you feel will help people with Asperger's identify your emotional patterns, and you will both have a better communication. My body language buddies, if you found this video useful, make sure you don't miss my upcoming analysis by subscribing and hitting that bell. And don't forget to download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. Much love and bliss.